Okay, great. All right, so guys, we're going to talk today about DevOps crossing the chasm. And as you can see, this is from DevOps.com, the site we recently launched, and a lot of information about DevOps. Recommend everyone go, whether you're a newbie, an intermediate, or an expert, you'll find some content there for you. So our first slide, okay, does everyone see the slide? I just want to make sure we're working, okay.
Yeah.
You know, the whole concept of crossing the chasm goes back to a book written by Jeffrey Moore in around 1991 called Crossing the Chasm. And though the book was really aimed at how to do high-tech marketing, the concepts that he's spoken about and the kind of model he's laid out has just been dead on the money for every technology sort of movement you know, every technology innovation that we've seen over the last 30 years. And the thing I will talk about, and I've done now this presentation a few times, you know, what I often compare DevOps to give it a relevance is what was what I think the last big technology sort of movement to cross the chasm, and that is the cloud, right? I remember, probably most of us on this phone call do, on this webinar do, you know, when people were doubting whether the cloud would really be adopted or not. And there are still some people who doubt whether the cloud is going to be as big as everyone says. But it's hard to argue with the numbers today that the cloud has certainly crossed the chasm. And DevOps, I believe, is right at the precipice of this chasm. And when we talk about the chasm, this is an illustration of it. And you'll see some of the polling questions came right out of the terms used here. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this model that you've seen before or not. And if you haven't, take a good look. We're going to see it on the next couple slides as well. The thing to remember about this model, though, is, guys, we're not looking at a timeline. We're not looking as you know, that this is the natural progression that every single technology follows. It is the natural progression that successful technologies follow, but there are many, many technologies that never cross the chasm. They never move from the visionary early adopters, innovator stage into, you know, the mainstream of the market, which is made up of pragmatists and conservatives. So this doesn't represent a timeline. This actually represents a bell curve of where technology kind of peaks out or peters out, as the case may be. And you know, this gives you a little bit of, this next slide gives you a little bit of a definition of the different players in here, right? So, you know, many of us in the IT space are IT people because at our hearts we're geeks and we love shiny new objects and we love to play and tinker with new stuff, and so we'll try anything. We may not do it in work because, you know, but at home we'll play with everything. And just about every technology you can imagine starts with those, you know, curiosity killed the cat kind of techies who love to try things just to try new things. Then the early market is then kind of picked up and carried by visionaries. And these visionaries sort of, they're looking to change. They need a game changer, right? And in their business, in their career, in their organization may need a game changer. So for me, kind of the quintessential game changer visionary in the DevOps field is the company Netflix, you know, and Adrian Cockcroft. This is a company that was going to disrupt the way we get content, you know, the way we view movies and TV shows. You know, think back to going to the Blockbuster store and picking up your DVDs, and I'm ashamed to say I'm old enough to go into the Blockbuster store and picking up my VCR tapes. you know, Netcraft was going to change that by delivering it digitally over the web. And, you know, it was a disruptive kind of technology and demanded sort of something that was going to leap ahead, right? And so they're to me the poster child of what a visionary early adopters are. Pragmatists, you know, I always tell people that pragmatists they don't really give a hoot what something is called. It could be DevOps, Shmevops. If it solves a problem that they have, they'll use it, right? And but the key to getting your pragmatists to adopt is they've got to be convinced that it does solve the problem. They don't want to be the guinea pig. They don't want to be the disruptor. They don't want to be the visionary or early adopter. If they see that this is a solution that many people have used to solve a similar problem to what they have, they are willing to give it a whirl. The next role after pragmatists are conservatives, and I know many of you in the audience today classified yourselves or your organizations as conservatives. Conservatives, it's not enough that other people have used a particular solution to solve a particular problem. Conservatives basically want to wait until the majority of people are using that solution before they will adopt it as a solution, right? So it's not enough that it's been used by some. It has to become the de facto standard before they will adopt it. And you know what? In many businesses, they don't have to be Netflix. They don't have to disrupt an industry. They already have a strong position in an industry. So there's no reason for them to have to or to want to adopt something new until it really has become, you know, the standard. And then, you know, there are some people, and some of you on this call have, you know, characterized your organization as laggards. You know, there's no way it's going to, you know, hell freeze over before they're going to adopt something, because they do what they do, and they just don't change very easily. And you know what? Whether you agree, disagree, make fun of them, laugh at them, or whatever, they represent a real segment of the market. And so to give you another illustration of these you know, segments is, you know, we look at this here and you could see you know, where the chasm is and you know, where Main Street is. And the Main Street represents the apex of that bell curve where pragmatic adoption is at its peak and conservative adoption is now, you know, catching on. Once you penetrate the pragmatists to the conservatives, you have, you know, hit mainstream. I'm just going to go one more slide. Whoop. You know what? Okay, yeah. So this gives us a little bit, you know, some metrics, right? So if we look at the innovators and early adopters, and we add those two up, we're at about 16% of the general market will use, you know, will fit into this pre-chasm sort of mold. And what's interesting is that's pretty close to the number in our poll today of people who considered themselves early adopters, right? Then on the other side of the chasm, we have pragmatists at 34%, and the conservatives also at 34%. Now, if we add those two up, you will see that between the pragmatists and conservatives, we're dealing with 68% of the market. So 2/3 of the market are you know, bound up within pragmatists and conservatives. And then the laggards are 16%, which, you know, in a symmetrical world just so happen to equal the visionaries and techies. So there are about as many laggards as there are early adopters. Now, in our poll today, we had some laggards, but I think according to the poll numbers, it was about half of what the early adopters, innovators were. So we actually have less laggards on the call today than many, usual markets tend to be. Before we talk DevOps in particular, though, I'd like to spend a quick moment on, let's look at some other technologies or technology movements and how they've moved along the chasm. And feel free to guys to chime in on chat and give us your thoughts on it. But one of I spoke about cloud. I wonder how many of you out there think that cloud has not crossed the chasm already, because it's something like 90% of the Fortune 500 has some infrastructure in the cloud at this point. Maybe not mission critical, but they do have some cloud infrastructure out there. So let's look at another one that may be near and dear to many of the folks on the phone call today, and that's idle, right? I have heard passionate arguments on both sides of this on whether idle really crossed the chasm or not, right? Has it reached its full, has it reached the apex of that mainstream market? And I'd love to hear what some of you folks think around whether or not idle has, in fact, crossed the chasm and has reached the apex of the mainstream. Don't be mad at me, but I tend to think it hasn't. I think idle is a technology that had a very tough time crossing the chasm. And, there are others that we could think of. Up until Apple launching the iPad, tablet computing was it had fallen into the black hole of the chasm. And, no one thought it was going to cross into mainstream. But I think we're certainly seeing tablets as mainstream technology today. There was a time where the internet itself, it was so slow, it was the World Wide Web, and whether that was even, in fact, going to cross over from visionaries or early adopters into the mainstream. And of course, that's probably a very silly argument to be made today. But let me move on to our next slide, hopefully. Okay. So where is DevOps today in terms of this adoption? Where is DevOps in crossing the chasm? I think, frankly, the responses that you gave in your poll answers are dead on to where we are in the mainstream. I think DevOps has garnered a lot of curiosity, a lot of goodwill, if you will, a lot of, wow, that sounds like it could help type of reaction from mainstream audiences. But as the majority here are, it's something we're planning to do. And it may be something we're planning to do in 3 months, 6 months, or 6 years, but it's something we're planning to do. And my skepticism comes from being in security for the last 4 years. In the information security space, security has been one of the top 3 priorities, well, just about ever since I got into security in the late 90s. And a funny thing is, it always remains in the top 3 priorities, but so many plans and processes just never get implemented. It's almost as if your arms are too short to reach your pockets. And I think sometimes when we talk about what are our plans to implement a DevOps culture or philosophy leading to the adoption and use of DevOps tools, we run into that same issue.
Alan?
Yes?
Hi, Alan. It's Karen. Excuse me. I have a couple of comments for you from our listeners on your question on idle. So David said idle is still spoken about in potential terms. Discussion on idle post-implementations are rarer. And
I agree with you. I agree.
Yeah. That's why we love to get practitioners to come in and do webinars and talk about their experiences. Just going to say that.
Oh, I agree. I mean, and I didn't want to be the one to say it was the one that idle fell in the chasm, but and as I said, I've heard passionate defenses both ways on it. but I think it's far from settled that idle has crossed the chasm, and if it ever will, for that matter. But that's probably fodder for a different webinar, and I don't want to talk politics or religion or idle.
Okay. And I just had a comment from Deborah for you also, and she said the silo mentality has kept idle from achieving its potential. The cloud, a service-based delivery model, may finally push it to move it across the chasm, because true cloud service isn't possible without service management structure and mentality.
100% correct. My only caution on that is don't count on the cloud being your savior. The cloud is the cloud itself, and when I mean the cloud, I mean the way we use the cloud, the processes and management around how organizations are deploying cloud-based infrastructure. It's still a bit of the Wild West, and the book is still being written as we watch. I hope it goes that way, certainly, but I don't know if we can bank on the cloud going a certain way or developing a certain way. I think it's evolving before our eyes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so where are we with DevOps adoption? And it's funny, you look around for what organizations are adopting DevOps, and I happen to think that our poll today was dead on, probably much closer to reality than some of the polls I've seen. One that I saw was the Puppet Lab survey, which is sort of the holy book in DevOps land. They do a survey, Puppet Labs, every year. Gene Kim, Jez Humble, a couple of the other folks are involved in it. And this is from their 2013, last year's survey. This year's survey results have not yet been published. But according to last year's survey, they have DevOps adoption is increasing, as you can see from the graphic here. 63% are now using DevOps practices in their organization, up from 50% in 2011. So this was I think 2011 and 2012 surveys was published in 2013. 26% increase in DevOps adoption. But I really take a very critical eye towards that. I really think that number is a case of when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And you've got Puppet Labs, which is a DevOps tool company, one of the most successful, granted, but it's a DevOps tool company asking respondents to take their DevOps survey, and so are we getting a true representation of the market, or are we just asking ourselves and kind of breathing our own exhaust here in terms of who's doing DevOps? I don't believe 63% of organizations are using DevOps at all. I think it's drastically lower than that, probably 20%. What I think part of the other issue around the FUD, or not the FUD, but the smoke and fog around that number is that if you're going to say every organization that's using the cloud is somehow doing DevOps, well, that inflates that number. The same way that we're saying, well, every organization that uses the cloud is going to need to use some sort of idle to get a handle on it and to manage it correctly in the systems and processes and so forth. So therefore, if you use the cloud, ergo you use idle, and or ergo you use DevOps, it kind of sounds like the Monty Python movie where, is she a witch? Well, if she's a witch, she'll burn. What else burns? Wood. Wood floats in water. So if she floats in the water, she must be a witch. It's the same thing. Just because you use the cloud doesn't mean you're using DevOps, nor does it mean you're using idle. So I do think that number is grossly exaggerated. I think it's probably closer to 20%. Or even 16%, and if somewhere between 16 and 20%, if you go back to our chasm diagram, that's right at the early adopter stage. But let's talk a little bit about the kinds of organizations that are using DevOps and have kind of become the poster child for DevOps, right? The real poster childs are what we call the unicorns. And this is a term, I'm sure Lisa's heard it and hanging out with Gene Kim and stuff. Unicorns are magical, mythical creatures that really don't exist in the real world, but they do exist in our world. And a lot of, you know, examples of unicorns, companies like Facebook and Google and Twitter, Apple, you know, the most successful companies that were kind of born or at least morphed into being internet giants, companies that deal with, you know, almost unimaginable amounts of data and transactions and customers. And so the only way they could do it successfully is through a DevOps sort of continuous delivery, high automation, you know, all hands-on working in the same kind of approach. And these companies have been wildly successful, right, deploying DevOps. And as I said, they serve as the poster child, right? So these are unicorns. And, you know, the good news is they really do serve as great examples of what can be accomplished here. The bad news is that not every organization can be a unicorn, and not every organization, frankly, wants to be a unicorn, right? And this is a conversation that I've had with Gene Kim over the years as well. And by the way, I call large enterprises elephants. Gene calls them horses. And Gene, you know, in Gene's world, almost every horse wants to grow a horn and become a unicorn, because look at the success those unicorns have had. But as I'm sure many of you out in the audience today are going to say, no, we really don't want to be a unicorn. You know, that's not, we don't, you know, our business isn't being the next Facebook or the next Google or Twitter. You know, the idea of iterating software or making 1,500 code changes a day to our software is frankly ridiculous. You know, I would like to move from a once or twice a year update on our software to, you know, something a little bit more iterative, but I don't need to be Facebook or Twitter. That's not our business. And I agree with that point of view. I tend to think that large organizations are more like elephants than horses. And if you think about an elephant, you know what? For as big as they are, they're surprisingly nimble, if you've ever seen an elephant dance. And the fact is, they are highly, highly intelligent creatures. You know, they have great memories. And you can say what you want about the elephant, and we can say what we want about large enterprise, you know, sort of being elephant-like. The fact of the matter is, elephants are pretty successful if you don't have people with large rifles shooting them for their ivory. But, you know, within the evolutionary world, elephants have been around a long time, and they've been very successful. And there's reasons for it, right? Their intelligence, their memories, they're nimble, and so are large organizations out there today. You know, I had a discussion with someone the other day who said, do you realize that something like 70 or 80% of the Fortune 500 from 1959 are no longer in business today? And yeah, that's probably true. I'm not going to deny that, but yes.
Alan, it's Lisa. I'm sorry. Can you repeat that? I could not have heard that right.
It's some outrageous number that like 70% of the Fortune 500 from 1959 are either no longer in business today or no longer in the Fortune 500. I'll double check it. But it's like a crazy number that really shows you the churn of corporations and the life cycle of these horses, elephants, whatever you want to call them. Obviously Microsoft, IBM was probably there, but Microsoft wasn't there in 1959. Either was Apple. I mean, think about who's in the Fortune 500 today and who was probably there then. Some are, right? The banks, I bet you the banks haven't changed much. J.P. Morgan, Chase was probably there, Citibank maybe. But you know what, Lisa, I will go back and get you that quote and post it up for us.
Please do. You're awesome. Thanks.
Okay. So the real issue for me, though, is what's it going to take for the elephants to move, right? And elephants represent both pragmatists, their intelligence is their pragmatists as well as their conservative nature, right? What's it going to take for elephants to adopt something like DevOps? And I analogize to the cloud and Amazon Web Services, right? So in 2012, 30% of Amazon Web Services clients were large enterprises. Interestingly, the most recent figures I've seen are that, as I think I said earlier, something like 90% of the Fortune 500 now utilizes some cloud infrastructure. And I don't want to overshoot the mark here. I'm not saying they've moved entirely to the cloud. What I'm saying is they've moved some stuff to the cloud. So in a very short time, relatively speaking, 3, 4, 5 years, we have seen a major migration. We have seen the elephants move into the cloud, right? And those weren't the early adopters like the Netflixes or think about companies that exist, almost entirely in the cloud. We have seen elephants moving to the cloud in large numbers. I'm not saying we've seen elephants move to DevOps in large numbers yet, but there's a very close analogy and parallel here. And the question really then becomes, what is driving these elephants to move to the cloud? And in my opinion, it's mice. And because what really forces large organizations to change or to, evolve, and I think it's competition. And today's elephants are under attack, under siege by small startup companies that threaten to disrupt their business models. And these mice, right, these mice are a different animal, no pun intended, or maybe pun intended. These mice are a very different animal than elephants, right? The mice, the startups, if you will, they're born in the cloud. They don't know. They do DevOps not by choice, but by necessity. Many of them don't have enough of an organization to have silos, right? The developer is the ops guy, the sysadmin. The developer is doing the customer support. The developer in QA, they're automating QA. I mean, as sacrilegious as some of you may think this sounds, I've heard developers from startups stand up and say, our customers are our Q&A, our QA. And think about, really? Your customer's doing your QA for you? How's that for customer satisfaction? But this is what we're faced with. This is exactly what we're faced with. And it's what elephants are faced with. So in the face of this competition, elephants are forced to adopt and adapt. And they're adapting technologies that their competition is sort of using against them and that they can make sense out of and that have been tried and proven enough that they feel comfortable at least dipping a toe in and if it works, they'll continue to do it. So things like the cloud, things like DevOps represent the abilities or the hope that these elephants will be able to still compete with disruptive technologies that are, coming at them from every angle, right? And those elephants, and why does DevOps cross the chasm? Why has the cloud crossed the chasm? Because those elephants that do not adapt to compete will fall by the wayside. Perfect examples are, let's look at the CRM business. I have good friends of mine who sold their marketing business to the Siebel systems 12, 14, 15 years ago. And they are, they sold it for a lot of money. One of the guys was from the UK. He went out and bought his own soccer team in UK. But think about Siebel systems compared to Salesforce.com. Or, from my own history, I helped found a company that went public in the .com days called Interliant, and we were hosting something called PeopleSoft, which is obviously now Oracle, but we were hosting PeopleSoft financial and HR applications in a hosted environment. We didn't call it the cloud, but I guess it really was early cloud. But think about all of those complex applications and SAP and Oracle apps that, were the norm, being hosted in a client server environment even, or mainframes before then, and mini computers, and how they exist today, how they've had to morph today, even in the largest elephant organizations. The software as a service, the cloud, the way we do development, and the way it's being deployed, things like shadow IT, for instance, are they're bleeding from the mice, from the startup groups into these elephants, not by choice. It's almost by necessity, and that's where I really think, and to me that's classic pragmatism, right? Ronald Reagan, as conservative as he was, and whether you like him or hate him, was the ultimate pragmatist. He made the deals with Tip O'Neill to get what he felt most important done, even if it meant giving something to the other side. Pragmatism, that's what it's about. And elephant organizations, enterprise organizations, seeing the need to move quicker, to deliver quicker, to serve customers better, and seeing some of the success stories from the unicorns and the mice around DevOps really are going to, they're going to come to the point where it's do something or fail, and the pragmatist will do something. And the real question is, are those pragmatists going to be successful, right? And that's going to be the issue of how we cross the chasm. Because if those early pragmatists, the elephant organizations and enterprises, are not successful, DevOps adoption will be stuck in its tracks. Very much probably, and very much like idle, frankly, right? If we don't have some good success stories and it doesn't sort of catch fire from there, right? Back in an early slide, at the pragmatist level was the bowling alley. If we don't get some strikes and build some momentum on that, it will not scale into the conservatives. And by your own definition, most of you out here today are belonging to conservative organizations. It's going to take more to get those conservatives than it does to get the pragmatists. The pragmatists are looking for solutions to help with their problems, solutions that have helped others. Conservatives won't adopt it until they see the pragmatists adopting it. So, it's far from certain that DevOps crosses this chasm, but we're at the point, I think, right now where the pragmatists among the enterprises are starting to. Now, there was a very interesting article in the Wall Street Journal this week written by a venture capitalist who said that DevOps is great for startups, but it's not ready for enterprises yet. And it was a big yet. And one of the reasons was, frankly, that enterprises are just not ready to make that radical a change to their culture to really benefit and adopt this DevOps philosophy. And you know what? Many of the answers that you folks have given in the panel question actually echo that sentiment. And when I first read it, my knee-jerk reaction was to write an op-ed piece on DevOps.com and say, oh, yeah, well, let me show you some of the enterprises that are adopting this. And the more you think about it, the more she may not be 100% wrong, the author of this article. And Jane and Karen, if you guys want to look up the article in the Wall Street Journal while I'm speaking and put up a link to it, feel free. It was just this last week or two. Just this last day or two, it was about 2 days ago. But that's really an issue, right? But let me end that one on a positive note. She said eventually the enterprises are going to have to adopt DevOps in order to compete. And both the enterprises are going to have to change a little bit and be more willing to accept this sort of change, and that DevOps is going to have to evolve and mature a little bit to be more palatable to many of these large enterprises. And frankly, it's the same thing we saw from Amazon Web Services, which again claims to have 90% of the Fortune 500, but they're not alone. Look, IBM paid about $2.5 billion, that's with a B, for SoftLayer to help bring cloud solutions out to their enterprise and mid-market enterprise customers. And Google is doing it with their Google Cloud platform, and they're not alone. Microsoft's Azure and Rackspace and take your pick of cloud platforms out there. What allows them to become adoptable, if you will, by these large enterprises are the enterprises, especially the pragmatists, are looking for something familiar in the new technology, a familiar name, a familiar process, something, right? It can't be so radically new that it's 100% new. There's got to be some recycle. It's got to look familiar to them, to what they already know, that it's not going to break them too far out of their comfort zones. And again, your polling answers, I think, hit this nail right on the head. At the end of the day, though, it's important to remember that pragmatists want to solve problems, right? They don't care whether it's called DevOps, ShmevOps, IDLE, FIDLE, CIDLE. It's only, does it solve the problem, and can I demonstrate that others have used it to solve the problem? But, understanding how enterprises work, understanding our problems are the key to picking the right solution. And never underestimate how different an elephant is from a mouse, or how different an elephant is from an Amazon. Because if you want to try to turn, whether you call them elephants or horses, you're going to try to turn them into unicorns. It just doesn't work. A horse is a horse, of course, as Mr. Ed once said, but they're not a unicorn, and so you need solutions that allow them to be a horse. Guys, how will we know we crossed this chasm? That's a great question. Yes?
Hi, it's Karen. Can I just interrupt for a minute? It's just about noontime. And it's a great presentation, and we're going to go a little bit long, and that's perfectly fine because everybody wants to hear more about this. But some of our listeners do need to drop off at noon, so I just wanted to mention for them what next month's webinar is before they drop off, if that's okay. Okay. So just give me 1 second. So we're pretty excited about the next webinar as well. We have 2 guest speakers from the United States Postal Service. We have John Edgar, he's Vice President of IT, and Kathleen Warner, she's Manager of Performance Achievement. And they're both going to be joining us and presenting Converting a Budget Deficit into an Innovation Surplus. And as we all know, it's no secret that the United States Postal Service operates under a stringent budget deficit. But what might surprise you is that the IT organization has converted that deficit into an innovation surplus. So please join us because they've been able to align IT as an enabler in support of a cross-functional initiative focused on service, revenue, and value transformation. And they're employing new strategies and approaches to service definitions and delivery, and IT is successfully achieving not only operational efficiencies, but cost savings and customer satisfaction. So please tune in next month as well. And back to you, Alan. Thank you.
Okay, guys, I'll wrap this up really quick. So how are we going to see that DevOps is going mainstream? Well, sites like DevOps.com are a good litmus test of what we're seeing out there. I think a key thing, though, is we'll see more of how to do DevOps instead of what is DevOps. We start seeing more horses or elephants become the poster child for DevOps rather than the unicorns. And we start seeing liquidity events with DevOps tools companies like a Puppet Labs or a Chef. Because a lesson I learned early on in my business career was nothing succeeds like success. And if we see some success within the DevOps space, we will see others adopt it. Just real quickly, for anyone who's listening who might be out in Colorado, Denver, Boulder area next week for the GlueCon conference, the Glue Conference, we're holding our Camp DevOps, our initial Camp DevOps in conjunction with GlueCon. It's at the University of Colorado Boulder campus, which is beautiful. And you can get online at campdevops.com to find out. We have some great speakers, by the way, lined up for that one. Help DevOps cross the chasm. Join our community at devops.com. We're looking for writers, sponsors, and DevOps rock stars. You can contact me if you're interested. And just real quickly, and as important, is ITSM Academy's DevOps Fundamentals course, which is a great course to understand DevOps and some of the building blocks and how do I get my organization to get their head around this. Is open for registration. There's 2 classes, one on August 25th through 28th, and again, December 2nd to the 5th. And I highly recommend that. If, 51% of you say you have plans to adopt DevOps, well, this is a great place to make those plans into blueprints. I think that's the end of my slide. I was going to, Karen, I'd give it over to you as a presenter and take any questions that we might have.
No, you can just leave it the way it is right now, Alan. It's fine.
Okay, let me go back then. Hold on. I'll try to, oh, shoot. I'm trying to go back to a slide here, but okay. All right, Brad, we can do it.
I'll say while Karen kind of puts those questions together, because there have been so many responses and questions and comments and just kind of all the way through. This has been a super interactive presentation, so thank you very much, Alan. In addition, and thank you for mentioning the fundamentals course, which we're very excited about. It really does focus on the cultural changes that need to take place to adapt DevOps into your organization. And it's a fantastic course, great reviews so far, so we're very excited about it. And also we have a DevOps overview, which is a 4-hour, and it is a very high level for those of you who kind of started today with I don't know what DevOps is. This is the course for you. And we are giving away 5 free seats in our next DevOps overview class, which is dated, I didn't pull it up, Karen, July, do you know? And
July 10th.
Thank you very much, Rachel. July 10th. And so for the first 5 people who email info@itsmacademy.com, we are going to be giving you the free seat in the class. And if you are beyond sort of the DevOps overview, but you want to gift it to someone in your organization, feel free to do so. And seriously, the first 5 in win the free seat. And it is in the virtual classroom, July 10th. And Karen, did that give you enough time to get your kind of questions together?
Yes, it did. Thank you, Lisa.
Oh, I'm such a good filler.
You are. Thank you so much. Okay, Alan. So Rand has a question, and his question is DevOps adoption driven by Agile adoption?
Sometimes.
I'm sorry, is DevOps adoption driven by Agile adoption?
Yes, sometimes it is. There are those who say DevOps picks off or Agile leaves off. I tend to think of it as Agile is, so stupid as this sounds, spaghetti is macaroni, but not all macaroni is spaghetti. And Agile is part of that DevOps process, if you will, right? Where Agile is more about, doing smaller chunks faster, if you will, and that kind of, but Agile focuses solely on the development process and developers, where DevOps, I think, expands to the ops folks, to the QA folks, and even to the finance and marketing and sales folks. It's an organizational wide kind of state of mind, where Agile is really about the developers. So I think it's part of it.
Okay, thank you, Alan. And I've got some comments on your presentation as well. First of all, great presentation, excellent content. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
People are commenting in with us. And Deborah came back in and she said that she agrees with you on that the cloud holds the potential, not the guarantee of achieving service-based operations.
Yes, it does. And so the cloud is full of potential. The worst thing in the world is wasted potential. But, we could all keep our fingers crossed and hope it turns out the way you want it to. But these things have a life of their own.
Yes. And David had a comment. He said, Facebook and Google are businesses based purely on an information model whose success depends on the manipulation and exploitation of digital information. And changing information forms and functions can create, not positive, this word, monetization opportunities for Google and Facebook, hence the need to rapidly change the tool set. Other businesses are less dependent on the purely information model. Elephants don't just eat, they farm and eat.
You're 100% correct, and that, it goes, David, I think we're in violent agreement here. Not every elephant wants to be a unicorn, or nor does every horse want to be a unicorn. Not to say that unicorns, look, we'd love to have a lot of stock in Facebook and Google and all of these companies, because we wouldn't be wasting our time on webinars. But not every organization is a Facebook or Google, nor do they want to be. Different models.
Mm-hmm. And Phyllis came in. Phyllis, I think she looked it up on the internet, and she said Fortune 500 firms in 1959 versus 2009, 86% are gone.
So,
Lisa, I wasn't wrong.
Is amazing to me, I have to say.
Thank you, Phyllis.
I didn't think you were wrong. Yes, thank you, Phyllis.
And those are all the questions that we have at the moment.
Great.
If anybody has anything else that you'd like to ask Alan, please chat it in now. And Alan, and again, it was wonderful information, and as we saw, more than 50% of the people on today's webinar didn't know about DevOps. So really, really helping to bridge that for them as well. So we so appreciate you coming in and speaking for us today.
My pleasure.
I'm sorry, Alan. I just was going to say that Jennifer M., Robert R., and Jeff Jensen have already emailed in, and yes, you each get one free seat in the DevOps overview. That means there are 2 more seats left. Seriously, people, it's just free training. There's no catch. So if you want it, email me right now, and we can announce the last 2 winners, and we'll send a follow-up email and tell you how to register.
And Lisa, did you have any questions on tweet? I think I tweeted in.
Well, Twitter has been blowing up with comments and quotes of what Alan's been saying, but no, not any, let me search that hashtag one more time and make sure, but not any actual questions.
Yeah, it's more, I think it's been like aha moments going on for people.
Yes, I agree.
We've been getting a lot of comments or questions. And that speaks to, it's not that well known yet, so that speaks to that. So once again, I would just like to remind everybody that the next webinar is scheduled for Thursday, June 19th, when we will have those 2 speakers from the U.S. Postal Service, John Edgar, VP of IT, and Kathleen Warnar, Manager of Performance Achievement, and their presentation will be converting a budget deficit into an innovation surplus.
And I have to say, Karen, I saw them present at a conference recently, and it was hands down the best practitioner presentation I've ever seen. And if you think about the number of conferences and the number of presentations that I've seen in my lifetime, that is quite a statement. The reason is that John and Kathleen are business people first. They really are so in tune. They do everything that we talk about you should do. They're so in tune with who their customers are, who their stakeholders are, delivering services to their customers. It was such a fascinating presentation, and I am so excited for next month. I mean, to have just, well, kind of everybody's always good, and we hit them out of the ballpark. But to go from Alan Shimel to the U.S. Postal Service is just, to me, it's like it's a trifecta, except it's two.
Okay.
I like that. Well, and most of you have requested pre-registration for the next webinar, and if so, you'll receive a confirmation from us by email. And for those of you that haven't registered, we'll send you an invitation for the webinar. And as you log out, if you just take a minute to complete the post-webinar survey, we'd really appreciate that, because we really do appreciate your feedback and try to make improvements on a monthly basis for you as well. And Alan, again, thank you so much. It's just been a delight listening to you today, and just bring all that information forward for us and helping us learn more about this.
Thank you, and thank everyone for sitting in. I hope it was worthwhile, and I'll be watching, and hopefully we'll be more DevOps stuff in the future.
I say,
Have a
Alan,
great day, everyone.
I say,
All
Alan,
righty.
let's grab hands and cross the chasm together. That's what I say.
That would be cool.
Okay, I'm in.
All right, I'll be
Talk
in
to you
touch. Say
soon.
hello.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.